story is based on true events. The following events are real and deeply disturbing. This story is based on true and documented accounts. If you choose to continue, prepare yourself to confront a terrifying and inescapable truth that few have the courage to face. What you are about to see is not for the faint of heart. The images and sounds that follow may send chills down your spine, make your skin crawl, and leave you with a lingering sense of unease. This is your last chance to turn back. If you decide to proceed, be aware that fear is real, and it is lurking. If you have enough courage, continue, and welcome to your worst nightmare. My name is Michael, and I moved to Ravenswood, a small, desolate town tucked away in a forgotten corner of the state. It was a fresh start, a chance to escape the cacophony of the city and immerse myself in the tranquility of rural life. Little did I know, this decision would lead me down a path of terror and despair. The house I purchased was a grand, Victorian-era structure. It had an air of faded elegance, with its tall, narrow windows, intricate woodwork, and a wraparound porch that groaned underfoot. The locals spoke in hushed tones about its past, warning me of the spirits that supposedly haunted its halls. But I was a skeptic, dismissive of such tales. I considered myself a man of reason, grounded in logic and science. The first few nights in my new home were peaceful. The house creaked and settled, as old houses do, but I paid no mind. I spent my days unpacking, arranging furniture, and getting to know the small town. Ravenswood had a certain charm, with its cobblestone streets, quaint shops, and friendly, albeit curious, residents. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, I retired to bed early. As I lay in the dark, drifting towards sleep, I heard it for the first time, a faint whisper. It was so soft that I could barely discern the words. "Help me," it seemed to say. I sat up, straining to hear more, but the house was silent. I dismissed it as my imagination and drifted off to sleep. The next night, the whisper returned, a bit louder this time. "Help me, please." The voice was that of a child, filled with desperation and sorrow. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened, but once again, the house fell silent. I turned on the lights and searched every room, but found nothing. There was no one there. Over the following days, the whisper grew louder and more persistent. "Help me, please." It echoed through the halls, a chilling reminder that I was not alone. It haunted my waking hours and filled my dreams with dread. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my work and the mundane tasks of daily life, but it was impossible. The voice was always there, just on the edge of hearing, driving me to the brink of madness. Desperate for answers, I began to research the house's history. I spent hours in the local library, poring over old newspapers and records. What I discovered sent shivers down my spine. Decades ago, a little girl named Emily had disappeared from the house. Her parents, the Johnsons, were well known in the town, and her disappearance had shaken the community. Despite extensive searches, Emily was never found, and the townspeople believed she had been murdered. Her parents, consumed by grief and guilt, eventually took their own lives. As I delved deeper, I uncovered more disturbing details. The Johnsons had a reputation for strict discipline, and there were whispers of abuse. Neighbors reported hearing screams and cries from the house, but no one had intervened. Emily had been a bright, cheerful child, but she often appeared with bruises and cuts, which her parents explained away as accidents. Determined to uncover the truth, I began to explore every inch of the house. I knocked on walls, lifted floorboards, and inspected every nook and cranny. It was during one of these searches that I found it, a hidden door in the basement, concealed behind a stack of old crates. The door was small, just big enough for a child to fit through, and it was locked. I fetched a crowbar from the garage and pried it open. Behind the door was a narrow, musty passage that led to a small, dark room. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. As I shone my flashlight around the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A small skeleton, curled up in the corner, clutching a worn teddy bear. The remains were those of a child, and I knew in my heart that I had found Emily. A wave of sorrow and guilt washed over me. Emily had been trapped here, forgotten and alone, her tiny body hidden away in the darkness. I gently picked up her remains and carried them upstairs, laying them on a clean sheet in the living room. I whispered a promise to her, my voice choked with emotion. "I'll give you peace, Emily. I swear it." The next day, I contacted the local authorities and arranged for a proper burial. Emily was laid to rest in the local cemetery, under a large oak tree, with a small headstone to mark her grave. As I stood by her grave, I felt a sense of calm wash over me, as if her spirit had finally found peace. For a while, the house was silent. The whispers ceased, and I allowed myself to believe that the haunting was over. But the experience had left its mark on me. I no longer scoffed at the supernatural. I had seen the darkness that lurked just beyond our understanding, and it had changed me in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. In the weeks following Emily's burial, I tried to return to normalcy. I focused on my work, took long walks around Ravenswood, and tried to engage with the community. The house, now silent, felt less oppressive, but the memory of Emily's tiny skeleton haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story, something unresolved that still lingered in the shadows. One night, as I was preparing for bed, the whisper returned. "Thank you," it said, so clear and close that it sent chills down my spine. I froze, listening intently, but the house was silent once more. I couldn't tell if the whisper was real or just a figment of my imagination, but it left me feeling uneasy. Determined to put an end to the haunting once and for all, I decided to consult with a local historian named Mrs. Abernathy. She was an elderly woman with a wealth of knowledge about Ravenswood's history and a reputation for dabbling in the occult. I hoped she could shed some light on Emily's tragic story and help me understand the whispers. Mrs. Abernathy welcomed me into her home, a cluttered, dimly lit house filled with books, artifacts, and strange symbols. She listened patiently as I recounted my experiences, nodding thoughtfully. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "Emily's story is a sad one," she said. "Her parents were strict, perhaps abusive, but they loved her in their own twisted way. When she disappeared, it broke them. The whispers you hear are likely Emily's spirit, seeking closure. She wants you to understand what happened to her." Mrs. Abernathy suggested that I hold a séance to communicate with Emily's spirit directly. I was hesitant, but I agreed, hoping it would bring some clarity. We set up a small table in my living room, lit candles, and placed a few of Emily's belongings, a hairbrush, a book, and the teddy bear, on the table. We joined hands, and Mrs. Abernathy began to chant softly, calling out to Emily's spirit. The room grew colder, and the candles flickered as if in response. I felt a chill run down my spine, and my heart raced in anticipation. "Emily," Mrs. Abernathy said, her voice calm and steady, "we are here to help you. Can you tell us what happened to you?" For a moment, there was silence. Then, the temperature dropped sharply, and a faint, ghostly figure appeared at the edge of the table. It was a little girl, her eyes wide with fear and sadness. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're here, Emily," I said, my voice trembling. "Tell us what happened. How can we help you?" Emily's figure grew clearer, and she began to speak. Her story was heartbreaking. She had been locked in the basement by her parents as punishment for a minor transgression. They had intended to release her, but a tragic accident had befallen them before they could. Emily had died alone, forgotten, and her spirit had been trapped in the house ever since. "We're so sorry, Emily," Mrs. Abernathy said, tears in her eyes. "We will do everything we can to help you find peace." With that, Emily's figure began to fade, and the room warmed slightly. Mrs. Abernathy instructed me to burn sage and place protective symbols around the house to cleanse it of any lingering negative energy. I followed her advice meticulously, hoping it would finally lay Emily's spirit to rest. In the days that followed, the whispers ceased entirely. The house felt lighter, almost welcoming. I visited Emily's grave regularly, leaving flowers and talking to her as if she was still with me. It brought me a sense of peace, knowing that her spirit was finally at rest. Life in Ravenswood slowly returned to normal. The townspeople, once wary of me, began to accept me as one of their own. I found a sense of belonging in the small community, and the house, once a place of dread, became a home filled with warmth and light. But even now, years later, I sometimes hear a faint whisper in the dead of night. "Thank you," it says, a gentle reminder of the little girl who found peace, and the man who learned to believe in the things that go bump in the night. And though the haunting is over, the memory of Emily's whisper will stay with me forever, a testament to the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil of our understanding. The following events are real and deeply disturbing. This story is based on true and documented accounts. If you choose to continue, prepare yourself to confront a terrifying and inescapable truth that few have the courage to face. What you are about to see is not for the faint of heart. The images and sounds that follow may send chills down your spine, make your skin crawl, and leave you with a lingering sense of unease. This is your last chance to turn back. If you decide to proceed, be aware that fear is real, and it is lurking. If you have enough courage, continue, and welcome to your worst nightmare. My name is Rebecca, and I grew up in a small town nestled in the shadow of a dense, ancient forest. The locals called it Blackwood, a name steeped in ominous legends and whispered fears. My parents always warned me to stay away from the forest, especially at night, but as a curious teenager, I couldn't resist its mysterious allure. One summer evening, my best friend Sarah and I decided to explore Blackwood. Armed with flashlights and a sense of adventure, we ventured into the dark, foreboding woods. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the rustling leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. We followed a narrow, winding path deeper into the forest. As the light from the setting sun faded, the shadows grew longer and more menacing. We laughed nervously, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that we were being watched. But as the darkness enveloped us, that feeling grew stronger. After about an hour of walking, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. It was dilapidated, with broken windows and a sagging roof. Despite its condition, it had an unsettling presence, as if it were watching us. We decided to take a closer look, our curiosity outweighing our fear. Inside, the cabin was a mess. Dust-covered furniture lay in disarray, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling like ghostly decorations. We explored cautiously, our flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. In one corner, we found a small, weathered journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, and the writing was faded, but we could still make out some of the entries. The journal belonged to a man named Elias Blackwood, the forest's namesake. He had lived in the cabin decades ago and had written about his life in the woods. His entries started off mundane, detailing his daily routines and observations of the forest. But as we read further, the tone grew darker. Elias wrote about a presence in the woods, something he called the Watcher. He described it as a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes that seemed to follow him wherever he went. At first, he dismissed it as a figment of his imagination, but over time, the encounters became more frequent and terrifying. He wrote of nights spent in terror, hearing whispers outside his window and seeing the figure lurking just beyond the tree line. Sarah and I exchanged uneasy glances. The journal's final entry was the most chilling. Elias wrote about hearing the watcher's whispers inside the cabin, growing louder and more insistent. He ended the entry with a desperate plea for help, and the words trailed off as if he had been interrupted. A sudden noise outside made us jump. Our flashlights flickered, and the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop. We decided it was time to leave. As we stepped outside, the forest felt different. The trees loomed closer, and the darkness seemed to press in on us from all sides. We hurried down the path, our footsteps echoing in the silence. But no matter how fast we walked, the feeling of being watched never left us. Sarah and I tried to reassure each other, but our words felt hollow. We knew something was out there, something that didn't want us in its domain. Suddenly, Sarah stopped dead in her tracks. Her flashlight beam had caught something in the distance. A tall, shadowy figure stood among the trees, its glowing eyes fixed on us. Panic surged through me, and we both started to run, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The forest seemed to close in around us, the path twisting and turning in ways we didn't remember. Branches scratched at our arms and faces as we fled, our only goal to escape the watchful eyes of the figure behind us. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel Sarah's fear mirroring my own. Finally, we burst out of the woods and into the safety of the open fields. We didn't stop running until we reached Sarah's house, where we collapsed on the porch, gasping for breath. We vowed never to return to Blackwood, and for years we kept that promise. But the memory of that night never faded. The image of the shadowy figure and its glowing eyes haunted my dreams. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, watching, waiting for the next curious soul to venture into its territory. Years passed, and I moved away from my hometown, hoping to leave the memories of Blackwood behind. I built a new life in a bustling city, far from the eerie silence of the forest. But every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye, or hear a whisper in the dead of night, reminding me that some things can never be truly forgotten. One autumn, I received a call from my mother. She sounded worried, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Rebecca, it's Sarah. She's missing. She went back to Blackwood." My heart sank. Sarah had always been more haunted by that night than I was. She had become obsessed with finding out more about Elias Blackwood and the Watcher. I tried to talk her out of it, but she wouldn't listen. And now she had disappeared into the very place we had sworn never to return. I packed my bags and headed back to my hometown, my mind racing with fear and guilt. When I arrived, I went straight to Sarah's house. Her parents were beside themselves with worry, and the local authorities had already started a search. But I knew I couldn't wait. I had to find her myself. Armed with a flashlight, a map, and a sense of dread, I made my way back to Blackwood. The forest looked just as menacing as I remembered, its dark canopy blocking out the sun. As I stepped onto the path, the memories of that night flooded back, and I felt the same oppressive presence watching me. I followed the path deeper into the woods, calling out Sarah's name. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. As the light began to fade, I reached the old cabin. It looked even more decrepit than before, a decaying relic of the past. Inside, the cabin was just as I remembered, but something felt different. The air was colder, and a sense of unease hung heavy in the room. I searched every corner, but there was no sign of Sarah. Desperate, I pulled out Elias's journal and started reading again, hoping to find some clue. The entries seemed to pulse with a new urgency, as if the words themselves were alive. The final entry, the one where Elias had pleaded for help, stood out. I noticed something I hadn't before, a set of coordinates scrawled in the margin. They pointed to a location deeper in the forest. With renewed determination, I left the cabin and followed the coordinates. The forest grew darker and more twisted as I ventured further, the trees seeming to close in around me. My flashlight flickered, and I felt the oppressive presence grow stronger. After what felt like hours, I reached the location. It was a small clearing, eerily silent and bathed in an unnatural light. In the center stood a large, ancient tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. And at the base of the tree, I saw Sarah. She was unconscious, her body limp and pale. I rushed to her side, shaking her gently. "Sarah, wake up. It's me, Rebecca." Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at me with a mix of relief and fear. "Rebecca, we have to leave. It's here. The Watcher. It's real." As if on cue, a cold breeze swept through the clearing, and the shadows around us seemed to come alive. The Watcher emerged from the darkness, its tall, shadowy form towering over us. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and a chilling whisper filled the air. "You should not have come back." Fear gripped me, but I knew we had to leave. I helped Sarah to her feet, and we started to back away from the tree. The Watcher didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that echoed in my mind. With every ounce of strength, we ran. The forest seemed to twist and turn around us, the path disappearing and reappearing in the gloom. But we didn't stop. The Watcher's presence loomed behind us, relentless and unforgiving. Finally, we burst out of the forest and into the open fields. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of Sarah's house. We collapsed on the porch, gasping for breath and clutching each other in relief. The authorities found us shortly after, and Sarah was taken to the hospital. She had no physical injuries, but the experience had left its mark on her. We both knew that Blackwood held a darkness that could never be fully explained. I left my hometown again, this time with a deeper understanding of the horrors that lurk just beyond the veil of our reality. The Watcher in the woods, a presence that defies reason, still haunts my dreams. And though I may never return to Blackwood, I know that some things are better left undisturbed, hidden in the shadows where they belong. The following events are real and deeply disturbing. This story is based on true and documented accounts. If you choose to continue, prepare yourself to confront a terrifying and inescapable truth that few have the courage to face. What you are about to see is not for the faint of heart. The images and sounds that follow may send chills down your spine, make your skin crawl, and leave you with a lingering sense of unease. This is your last chance to turn back. If you decide to proceed, be aware that fear is real, and it is lurking. If you have enough courage, continue, and welcome to your worst nightmare. Villisca, Iowa, is a small, tranquil town with a history that seems almost too peaceful to be true. Nestled in the heartland of America, it's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and secrets are few and far between. But on a fateful night in June 1912, this serene facade was shattered by an unspeakable horror that continues to haunt the town to this day. The Moore family, Josiah, Sarah, and their 4 children, lived in a modest house on 2nd Street. Their home was typical of the era, with its simple design and cozy interior. They were a well-loved family, known for their kindness and involvement in the community. On June 9th, they had attended a Sunday school picnic, enjoying a day of fun and fellowship. The evening was warm and pleasant as they returned to their home, completely unaware of the terror that awaited them. The house was quiet as they settled in for the night. Josiah and Sarah tucked their children into bed. Herman, 11, Catherine, 10, Boyd, 7, and Paul, 5. The 2 young friends who were staying with them, Lena and Ina Stillinger, had also been invited to sleep over. By 10 p.m., the house was dark, the family resting peacefully in their beds. But outside, under the cover of darkness, a shadowy figure lurked. The killer, armed with an axe, approached the house with grim purpose. The intruder had been careful not to alert anyone. The door was unlocked, a common practice in the town where crime was virtually non-existent. Inside the house, the scene was set for a nightmare. The killer crept through the quiet rooms, moving with a calculated precision. He started with Josiah, who was sleeping soundly in his bed. The axe came down with brutal force, the first blow silencing him instantly. Next was Sarah, her cries for help stifled before they could reach the ears of her children. The children, disturbed by the sounds of the attack, remained unaware of the danger. The killer moved methodically through the house, each swing of the axe claiming another victim. The family's once peaceful home became a macabre tableau of violence and death. The killer spared no one, not even the youngest child, Paul, who had been tucked snugly into his bed. The brutality of the attacks was almost beyond comprehension. Each victim was struck multiple times, their bodies left in a grotesque display of violence. The Stillinger girls, who had been staying the night, were also targeted. They were found in the same room as the Moore children, their bodies placed together in a nightmarish arrangement. The killer had taken great care to ensure that no one would be left alive to tell the tale. The next morning, neighbors noticed something was amiss. The Moore's front door was wide open, and there was no sign of life inside. Concerned, they entered the house and were met with a sight that defied belief. The once familiar rooms were now scenes of unimaginable horror. Blood splattered across the walls and floors. The police were summoned, and an investigation quickly began. Detectives found no signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to be missing. The killer had taken the axe from the Moore home itself, used it to commit the murders, and then left it behind. The brutality of the crime shocked the community, and the lack of evidence left the investigation at a standstill. Theories abounded, but the case remained unsolved. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation yielded no significant leads. Various suspects were considered: traveling salesmen, drifters, and even local townspeople, but none were conclusively linked to the crime. The case grew cold, and the killer remained at large. The townspeople were left in a state of fear and mourning, unable to comprehend the violence that had shattered their peaceful lives. The Moore house stood as a grim reminder of the night's events. Despite the passing years, the brutality of the murders remained fresh in the memories of the townspeople. The house, once a symbol of family life and happiness, had become a place of fear and sorrow. As time went on, the house was sold and changed hands several times. Each new owner reported strange occurrences that they couldn't explain. Visitors claimed to hear unexplained noises and experience sudden, eerie drops in temperature. The house became a place of local legend, its reputation growing as a site of paranormal activity. The Villisca Axe Murder House's infamy continued to grow, attracting paranormal investigators and thrill-seekers from across the country. The house, now a historical site, offered tours that revealed the dark legacy of the Moore family's tragic end. However, those who dared to enter reported unsettling and disturbing phenomena that only deepened the house's reputation as a haunted location. In the late 1990s, the house was purchased by a group dedicated to preserving its history and offering tours to the public. The intention was to educate visitors about the tragedy and offer insights into the investigation. However, the house seemed to have other plans. The first tour guides experienced an array of disturbing incidents. Shadows moved across the walls, and objects seemed to shift on their own. One guide reported an encounter that left her shaken. While alone in the house, she felt an icy breath on her neck and heard footsteps echoing down the hallway. When she turned around, the hallway was empty, but the sensation of being watched remained. A group of paranormal investigators visited the house to document these occurrences. Their experience was both fascinating and terrifying. They set up cameras and audio equipment throughout the house, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. What they recorded was chilling. Ghostly figures, shadowy shapes, and unexplained orbs of light moving through the rooms. The investigators also conducted a séance in the house. They gathered in the living room, lit candles, and placed objects from the Moore family, such as a hairbrush and a book, on a table. During the séance, the atmosphere grew heavy, and the temperature dropped noticeably. The investigators reported hearing faint, mournful whispers and feeling a presence that seemed to grow more oppressive as the session continued. One of the most unsettling incidents occurred during an overnight investigation. The team reported hearing a loud crash from the attic, followed by a disembodied voice that said, "You shouldn't be here." The attic door, which had been securely locked, was found swinging open on its own when they investigated. The audio recordings captured eerie sounds, footsteps moving around and disembodied voices whispering incomprehensible messages. The Villisca Axe murder house remained a place of fascination and fear. Visitors and investigators continued to experience disturbing phenomena, from cold spots and sudden drops in temperature to unexplained noises and ghostly apparitions. The house seemed to hold on to its dark past, with each new visitor adding to its lore. Despite numerous attempts to understand and explain the hauntings, the Villisca Axe murder house stands as a somber reminder of the night's horror. The killer, who eluded capture over a century ago, remains an enigmatic figure in the town's history. The house, with its chilling atmosphere and tragic legacy, continues to be a place where the boundary between the living and the dead blurs, offering a glimpse into the darkness that still lingers in the shadows of the past. The enduring mystery of the Villisca Axe murder house serves as a chilling testament to the horrors that can unfold in the quietest of places. For those who dare to enter, the house offers a haunting reminder of the violence that once occurred within its walls and the restless spirits that may still linger, forever bound to the night of June 9, 1912.